Welcome to Woven Translations by Mary Kircher. Today I'm going to talk about warping a loom board. Now these loom boards can either be in a weaving journal that I've made, and you'll see that there are 4 of these pages in the journal, and they all have these little teeth, serrated teeth on them. And so this is what we're going to use for our looms, and we'll get that warped up. You could also do this on the standard loom boards. You can buy these separately as well. So the tools that I need are, in addition to the weaving journal, some kind of a string to use as my warp. And the warp is the long thread that we'll do our weaving onto. I like to use 8/4 cotton warp. This doesn't have any stretch, and it's used for making things like rag rugs. And it comes in many, many different colors. And you can get these from a number of yarn suppliers. But just look online for cotton rug warp, okay? But you don't need to use this. This might be something that some weavers already have. You could use twine that you can find either in the grocery store or at a hardware store. But make it kind of a lightweight twine, but most twines won't stretch on you, so that works really well. Other tools you're going to need for this exercise are some kind of a scissors and some needles. Now I like, for both weaving and the last step in the warping process, I like to use these bent tip needles. You'll see there's a little bend in it. I find that when I'm weaving on the board that I can use that tip to pick up my warp threads. And these are made by a company called Clover, and I found them in the knitting section of my local craft stores. So pick up some of those kinds of needles. You can use regular tapestry needles as well. Okay, so let me start the process for warping the loom. I'm going to start warping the loom now. I'm using my 8/4 cotton carpet warp, and like I mentioned, you could use some twine from the hardware store for that matter. And I'm putting a loop in the end of it and tying an overhand knot. I want my loop to be maybe 1 inch long. Not real short, not too long. Not that it matters that much. Now that loop is going to go over the first tooth. Okay, and then I pull the string down to the first notch on the bottom. Take that string under that first tooth into the second notch, and I've got myself all tangled here. Under the tooth, out the third notch, down to the bottom, into that third notch, under the next tooth, and up to the top. Under the next tooth, more yarn, and down to the bottom. This will take approximately 6 yards to warp, and just carry on, going from top to bottom, nice and straight through each next tooth. Like so. Now, you'll want to be careful that you don't get the tension too tight. I don't want my page to bow. I want it to stay relatively flat. And I'm just finishing up, going over, under, and now I'm down to my last string. Now what do? Well, I don't suggest tying a knot around that because it's more likely to bend the tooth. So what I'll do is I put my thumb right at the bottom of the page, turn the yarn over to make another loop, do an overhand loop like so, again about 1 inch long. I'm going to cut off my extra thread, and this is where the needle comes in, and this is where you get to bow the page. So by bowing the page just a little and taking that needle, I can slip that loop over the tooth. I'll also trim this little tail, and now I'm ready to weave. One other thing to consider is that even though I've got this side all warped and I can go ahead and weave, I still have the back side of my page, and I can do the exact same thing and just overlap the previous threads there and continue to warp along the back. A third option is if you think you're going to use the same warp and roughly the same weight of materials in your weaving, you could actually put a loop here, go down around the back and up to the next notch, down to the second notch, around the back, and carry on like going round and round the page. I typically don't do that because sometimes I like to change the color and sometimes I don't know what I'm going to weave next. So I just do one side at a time, but those are other options that other folks have used. Happy weaving!